Hey there guys, so in this video I'm going to be talking about an upcoming character in 1.6, Kazuha, Kiryu, or Kiryu Kazuha. He's gonna be a character that's gonna come probably somewhere around 1.6 alongside Klee, and from the looks of things, he's actually pretty good. From my first impressions so far, I think that he's main DPS slash support. And I'll get into why exactly I think that is the case. Now, note that this is not final. This is like the first day of his details, so obviously they're going to change, but they won't change too much because usually when the details of a character come out, they change, but they don't change that much. They change very slight stuff. So I think we have a pretty good idea of what he can actually do currently. So yeah, let's get right into the video. So Kazuha. He's an anemo character that uses one-handed swords. Now, he's a sword character, and I think sword actually fits him really well because there are two main ways so far that I see of building him. It's either your typical build where you go attack percent, crit, and damage bonus, nothing special. And then the second way to build him, if you want him to be a full-on support, is you build a ton of elemental mastery on him. And sword is great because there's a free-to-play sword which is Iron Sting, which gives you a ton of elemental mastery, and Harbinger of Dawn is a 3-star sword that's on par with almost on par with like 5-star swords, 5-star weapons, because the 3-star sword is just so good, which gives him a bit of an edge, I would say. The fact that he's a sword character is pretty nice because he has access to very, very good weapons, especially for free-to-play. But anyway, I'll talk more on that later. Let's move on to his stats. So first off, let's look at his stats. His defense, I believe, is the second highest in the game, only behind Albedo and Hu Tao because those two's defense are tied, which gives extra tankiness, which is always nice. His HP is also pretty above average with 13,348, and his base attack is 297, which is also pretty high. I believe this is the 8th highest base attack in the game so far, because if I remember correctly, the order it goes from Xiao with the highest attack, Eula, Ganyu, Diluc, Keqing, Klee, and then Child. And then you have Kazuha here as 297. So yep, I believe he's the highest non-300 attack stat, which is nice. Not to mention this elemental mastery 115.2 is actually pretty nuts. This is the highest elemental mastery ascension stat we've seen basically ever, because the only one that has this is like Lisa, and Lisa has like 70 or 80 at level 90, so not nearly as much as this. Alright, so just to give reference on how much 115 elemental mastery is, I'll put 115 elemental mastery in my Hu Tao real quick. Now here, 115 elemental mastery. For Kazuha, since he's anemo, we're gonna focus on this part. Increases overloaded, superconduct, electrocharge, shattered, and swirl by 50%. So his swirl is gonna be stronger by 50% just with his built-in ascension stat. So yeah, that's for his stats. Now time to get on to the more complicated stuff. His skill set. Now his normal attack, we can basically kind of ignore the normal attack. The normal attack doesn't do much. However, something that's special is that his plunge attack modifier is actually very, very high. If you compare it with every other character, he has the highest plunge damage out of all the sword characters, and his plunge damage modifiers are all equal to Xiao. Like for example, level 8, 349%, Xiao's 349%. So his plunge modifier is as strong as Xiao. His plunge probably won't be as strong though because Xiao has his ult, whereas Kazuha is more versatile all around. Because when Kazuha plunges, he converts the damage to anemo damage, and he will create a miniature wind tunnel that pulls nearby objects and opponents in. So it'll be kind of like a small Sucrose E probably, or maybe the Viridescent bow kind of thing, where it's just a small tornado that like brings enemies in, which is really cool. I really like that. because knockback in this game is pretty annoying sometimes. And pulling the enemies in is always nice because you can more easily hit them. So now his E skill is really confusing because here it says that his press E, it pulls enemies into you and then launches them away, probably something like Sucrose's E, which deals Anemo damage, and then it also makes a rushing wind current, which is probably like Venti's wind current where you can fly up, and then while you're in midair, you can then do a powerful plunging attack. Now, I'm not exactly sure if this plunging attack is supposed to be an E because it says press can be used in midair right after the plunging attack part. But my guess is that the E is probably the first part where it sucks the enemy in, it launches them out, and then it creates a wind current. And then the plunging attack is probably just you doing it manually with a left click. And his hold E, I'm guessing, is like the same thing as the press E, but just more damage. Because it says charges up before unleashing greater Anemo damage over a larger AoE than press mode. So it kind of implies that it's the same as the press E. However, it does more damage and it has higher range at the cost of an extra 3-second cooldown. And then when a plunging attack is performed using the effects of the press E, which basically probably just means that if you use the current, then when you plunge, it immediately turns into Anemo damage and then creates a wind tunnel that like sucks the enemies in. So yeah, so I think his E could actually be pretty dang good, a really good source of Anemo damage. If he works the way I think he does, he seems like a Xiao 2.0 to be honest, where instead of getting the ult to plunge, he can plunge whenever he wants with his E instead. And now his ult, what his ult does is it's similar to Venti's and Sucrose's to where it just does damage. I'm guessing it's more like Sucrose due to the duration because like the duration I think is the same as the Sucrose, 8 seconds. And what it does is it does slashing damage, and the slashing damage is probably the first hit of the ult, and then the DOT is the hits that come after. Now I have no idea how many times it'll hit. Maybe it'll hit 4 or 5 because Sucrose's also lasts the same amount of time and she hits like 45. If we assume that like maybe it hits 3 times with this calculator. Oh my god. Plus 4, 19.84. Yeah, his ult is basically gonna do 1,000%, almost 1,000% damage if that's the case. And additional elemental damage, 57%. I'm guessing that's also like Sucrose, where if you have any other element combined with his Anemo, which of course you will, because this is a team party game, then he'll do an extra 57.6% of that element damage, which is also a nice bonus. The energy cost is also not that bad. It's at 60, so it's also pretty cheap. And now his passives. His first passive is if his E comes in contact with if his E comes in contact with any element, elemental absorption will occur, and then it will deal additional 200% damage of that elemental type, which will be considered plunging attack damage. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work either, because the phrasing is really weird. The phrasing, again, is exactly the same as like Sucrose. So, if this passive does work like Sucrose, then you will do an extra 200% damage of what you're already doing on the E, but it goes through resistance twice for some reason, which will significantly make the passive damage much lower. Even if it's 200%, it'll end up being lower, but it gives his E like extra damage, so it's fine. Which, man, he's just very, very confusing. Like these words are just nuts. It's very confusing. And then his second passive. Now his second pass, everything has kind of been pandering to a role of main DPS plunge, like Xiao 2.0. But his second passive is also something that you can work on, because upon triggering a swirl reaction, Kaedehara, I have no idea. Is he supposed to be Kaedehara Kazuha or is he Kiryu Kazuha? He apparently has many names. He will grant teammates a 0.03% elemental damage bonus to their corresponding element for every point of elemental mastery he has for 8 seconds. And bonuses for different elements obtained through this method can coexist. This second passive is one that's pretty easy to understand, and it's also really dang good. Because, let's say you're trying to build him all elemental mastery. If you're trying to build him all elemental mastery, then you can get 800 pretty easily, based on like Sucrose currently. Because currently Sucrose EM can actually go up to around 900 plus. But let's just assume 800 for average purposes. So, and then plus is 115.2 because that's his innate elemental mastery. And then if we times this by 0.03, every single element you combine him with, you will get a 27% damage bonus. Keep in mind there's no cooldown for this either. So you can proc this as many times as you want. And the proc condition is extremely easy too, where you just swirl. So what you can do is, if you want to run him as a full support, he's actually one of the best damaging supports in the game. Because not only does he do pretty good damage himself, but if you build him with tons of elemental mastery, he can give you a permanent 27% or higher damage bonus for your main DPS. Like for example, if you're using a Ganyu, you just inflict them with Cryo and then you swirl once and then you can switch back to Ganyu for that 27% damage bonus for 8 seconds. And you can do this for many elements at once. Like for example, if you want to do Electro, Pyro, Hydro, everything all at once, you can. And yeah, since there's no cooldown for this either, you can keep this up infinitely. So that's also really, really good. So his support role is very easy. He's probably the best support in the game when it comes to actually increasing damage. Because not only does he give this damage bonus, which no other character actually has, no other character can boost your damage bonus directly. And damage bonus is amazing because it just multiplies your damage. Like whatever damage it is, right? Multiplied by 27%. That's why damage bonus is so good. And he also, I believe, and he's also a Nemo, which means he can use the 4-set Viridescent set, where if he swirls, the resistance of the enemy gets reduced by 40%. So a 40% reduced resistance on the enemy and a 27% elemental damage bonus makes him probably the best support in the game. That makes him the best support in the game when it comes to boosting damage, in my opinion. But if you don't want to build him as a support, you can also build him as a main DPS, because you can plunge with him, but think of it like this. He's a Xiao that does less damage by himself because he uses his E. He's a Xiao that does less damage by himself, but he's a lot more convenient to use because he can just plunge with his E instead of waiting for his ult. And potentially, he could actually do more damage than Xiao over time because Kazuha combines a lot of elements together. Like he's basically Xiao, but he can combine elements. Like here, his E gets 200% additional damage of element, whatever that one's combined with, and he can use it whenever he wants. His plunge attack modifier is also just as high as Xiao. So honestly, I wouldn't be that surprised if he ends up out damaging Xiao even, because he seems to be built in a very similar fashion, and his ult looks like it can do tons and tons of damage. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Kiryu Kazuha, and the fact that he's also a sword, as I mentioned previously. I'm now going to go on why I think that's so good. First off, every sword character has access to Harbinger of Dawn. which I think is the best 3-star weapon in the game by far. This weapon is so nuts that I would probably actually put it at a 4.5 star rating. It's not as good as the 5-star weapons because low base attack, but it's much better than a ton of 4-star weapons in this game because it's the only weapon that gives tons of crit rate, 28% crit rate, and 46.9% crit damage. And crit is one of, if not the most important stats in the game. The attack isn't that low either. It's at 401, which is usable. But that crit rate by 28 and then that crit damage by 46 is just a huge game changer. Because artifact RNG is a bunch of crap. So this really, really helps. He also has another weapon which is absolutely great for him, which is Iron Sting. And yet again, this is another free-to-play weapon, which is awesome. Now, this weapon's really good for him because 510 base attack, of course. The base attack is pretty decent. It has Elemental Mastery, which is great, 165. Because not only does Elemental Mastery really help for his support build, Elemental Mastery also boosts Swirl by a lot, which you're gonna do with him all the time. And just 115 already gives 50.6% extra Swirl, so 165 is around 75%. And this refinement also helps him a lot, because dealing elemental damage increases all damage by 6% for 6 seconds, max 2 stacks. His plunge attack automatically converts to Anemo damage, so he can actually do elemental damage that way. So this passive will basically be up almost the entire time. And now his signature weapon. Boreas Precocity. It's also cluing in to the fact that he might also be a Xiao version 2. Because you notice closely, the passive is basically the same. It increases damage by 10%. When you trigger a reaction, you gain 1 sigil, which he's Anemo. You're gonna proc those all the time. When you do 2 element reactions, you get 16% increased normal, charge, and plunge attack damage, and increase attack by 20%. Now, increases attack by 20% is very normal, but increases normal, charge, and plunging attack. Plunging attack. That's pretty suspicious. Especially since his plunge attack is also suspiciously a bit high. And everything is basically pointing to plunging attack or elemental mastery support. So, yep. That's also why I say that he's Xiao version 2. Because basically all the clues are pointing to that direction. So, yep, that's my thoughts on Kazuha. He's going to be a Xiao 2.0 or the best damaging support in the game. That's what I think he's going to be. And, yeah. For the record, I do not think he's going to scale well with physical at all. I've seen a lot of people talk about building him physical, but I just don't see it, since a lot of his damage is going to come from his E, which is Anemo already, and his plunge attack, which will become Anemo whenever the E is active. And his normal attack modifiers just aren't good at all. His normal attack modifiers are very, very low. So, yep. I believe the best builds for him will be Anemo build or Elemental Mastery build. And yeah, that's it. See you guys next time.